it hits the fan, you need to hit the road immediately. Hey, it's Clint Emerson, and we're going to show you how to prepare your own bug out bike. Not a bug out bag, the whole bike. Don't worry, you ride it, you don't wear it on your back.
Mike,
Buddy,
how's it going?
it's awesome.
So, I made you drive here in the freezing cold.
Well, I will say 37 on a motorcycle for an hour first thing in the morning is, it's about like a cold plunge.
Yeah. And the cold shock proteins released, and
For sure they
you,
did.
you feel like a new man now.
I do.
Well, I appreciate you coming out so that
Yeah.
we can sit here and talk bug out bikes. I feel like you and I both have a passion for motorcycles and putting it together with adventure, but also wrapping it up in a scenario that's kind of apocalyptic.
Yeah.
It's just fun.
Yeah.
But before we dig into it, let's talk about just the need for bug out in general. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get like a feeling like it's becoming more and more important, like every year, right? Do you have the same vibe, or what do you think?
I do. I mean, you can see kind of the downward spiral of both society and just from a utility standpoint, whether it's power grid or supply chain, both food and products. I mean, it's such a fragile system. I mean, you can see something as simple as a hack on an airline computer system for 6 hours, what it does. Or something even going way back, like the Boston bombing scenario where it shut, the entire eastern seaboard down for a week.
Yeah.
When you see little things that have such a ripple effect on our society in really all aspects, I think you'd be foolish to not both A, pay attention, and B, have some level of preparedness.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And you bring up a good point with supply chain. And I mean, the pandemic was proved just how unprepared the country is. When you go to a grocery store and there was plenty of beans and rice on the shelf, but all the toilet paper was gone.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that said everything, and was probably the biggest reason why I put together Rugged Life, is to give people those basic skills that every American used to know,
Yeah.
right? Every dad, mom, and child just 100 years ago knew how to do everything because it was the way of life and it's how they survived each day. The pandemic highlighted how much we don't know, how much reliance we have on technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, going back 200 years, in 1820, statistically, 90% of the population were farmers.
Yeah.
90%. Philadelphia was the biggest city. It had 40,000 people in it. That was 200 years ago. So just in the last 200 years, and if you go back, the last couple thousand years, similarly, like, mankind or the human race on planet Earth has been pretty consistently kind of the same way for a long time up until the last 150, 200 years. And so we're kind of in uncharted territory that way. And again, I use the word fragile because if you look at so many different aspects of life, like New York City as an example, a snowstorm, how it can shut down the entire city for a couple of days, or, just little things that have such a massive impact that I just think people don't really think about. And a lot of people listening, when you start talking about bug out bikes and bug out vehicles or bug out properties or whatever, may look at it and say, well, it's largely resource dependent. And I don't disagree with that. But to me, like, at least have a plan, like at least have thought about it, at least have whatever it is within your means to be able to prepare and have some idea of what you're going to do if things go south. At least be talking about it. No different than, if your house catches fire, like, you should have at least a plan of what you're going to do, or you get split up at the mall when you have young kids, like, what's our plan? I mean, at least walk through it,
Yeah, couldn't agree more, man. I think planning is essential. You might not be able to afford the latest and greatest, like, gear or whatever it is, but it's really not about the gear as much as it is about thinking through, what am I going to do? How am I going to react? How am I going to recover? And then keep on moving forward.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. It's pre-crisis, crisis, post-crisis. And if you just break down those three elements in its most simplest forms, you're 99% ahead of everyone else that's just flying blind, especially now. And when you talk about bug out, we have bug out routes, you got bug out vehicles, you got bug out homes, you got bug out bags. right? We have bug out for just about anything. And for those that don't know, bug out really is just a, short slang term for essential gear that is heavy on life support, that's put together in an orderly fashion, that then supports the situation or the environment you might find yourself in. And, you can apply it to a lot of things. Plus, bug out just sounds cool.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a catchy buzzword.
It's catchy, yeah. Threats. We've talked about some little historical events that certainly had ripple effects. What big threats are you kind of seeing going on out there?
I mean, for me, you certainly have your finger on the pulse more than I do with all the security stuff that you do. Having said that, I think, the big ones that kind of obviously come to mind for me are China/Russia and then Iran. To me, those three, if you want to call them actors, at least from my perspective, seem like the biggest realistic threats. And I think most notably, whether it's the nuke capability, to me, the probability of that, I think, is pretty low, just because I think everybody understands the ramifications. Even somebody that's crazy, understands that, the human race kind of hinges on our impulse control to not use those weapons. Not to say that it couldn't happen. We've obviously used them, as a society. We're the only society that's actually offensively used them. But to me, the biggest kind of thing that I think about as a big EMP hit from China, the weather balloon, scenario. To me, that's the most, probably the scariest thing, because if you think about every thing we have runs off of electronics, and the thought of something, whether it's 5 or 6 of those scattered all over the country, or them infiltrating them through a port of entry and then putting them in a semi-trailer and having half a dozen of them all over the country go off at the same time, whatever. To me, that has the most significant impact on our day-to-day life, society, our ability to thrive, because everything's run off of it, and I mean, to me, now your banks aren't accessible, really. Most people do online banking, but even going into a branch, it's a computer system. An ATM is a computer system, or an operating system. So to me, a massive EMP attack essentially makes the U.S. dollar worth nothing the next morning. And to me, in that scenario, now all bets are off. I mean, the power grid, the utilities, power, water, sewer, so many of these mechanisms run off of that. Travel, again, banking, you name it, food, supply chain, Amazon, all of it. So very quickly, if that one kind of single source attack, I think, again, from my perspective, is the most threatening. The reality of an invasion, or a military style attack, or nukes, or whatever, to me, the probability of that is so low. I don't think it's really worth prepping for, or trying to plan for, other than maybe a casual, what would I do if, and tack that on to your normal bug out plan. But to me, the EMP thing is the biggest threat.
Yeah, I agree. You bring up China. They've got right now, what we know about is 2 submarines that has our EMP technology that they stole, right? So they could theoretically put one submarine on the West Coast, one submarine on the East Coast, and then fire it off. The whole submarine basically creates the EMP that shuts down both coastlines, which to me is that's all you got to do. You don't have to shut us all down.
Yeah. You
have to shut down just a small percentage of major cities, and you're pretty much taking the whole country offline.
Yeah.
With that, Russia, you mentioned them earlier. Most people don't know, but there's plenty of information out there. Is these Poseidon torpedoes, right? These things are the size, if not bigger, than a school bus. They're nuclear powered, which means you can take it off the leash, put it at 3,000 feet, let's say, in the ocean somewhere, and they can literally sit there and circle for days, months, years. They never have to come up for air. They never have to come back. They never run out of life because they're nuclear powered. And he's got Putin has several of these Poseidons now deployed. And not only are they nuclear powered, they are a nuke, and they're massive. And so the idea that is he could launch one, once again, East Coast, West Coast, these things would blow up probably, a half a mile offshore and create a tsunami, massive wave that just takes out, certain portions of the coastline. And imagine if you had, 4 or 5 of these on each coastline. And not to mention, the scary part is they go 100+ knots underwater, right?
That's hard to even wrap your mind around.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the size of a bus, we have absolutely nothing in our arsenal to stop one of these things because of how fast they are underwater, and they're nuclear powered, and they are a nuclear weapon. To create a plausible deniability piece, right? He could theoretically fire one of these things off, create a huge tsunami, take out a city on the west or east coast, and then say, it must have been an earthquake.
Yeah.
And then you get into this battle of, okay, now we got to prove it, right? And he's just going to go, I didn't do anything.
And how do you respond?
And how do you respond? So he's taken the nuclear threat and turned it into a natural disaster with a little bit of plausible deniability, which then makes it difficult for, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah.
Right? It's a little bit of checkmate with that system. And what I find interesting is we've prided ourselves as a country that we're protected by 2 oceans on either side.
Yeah.
Now our adversaries are creating ocean-bound weapons to then take us out via the very thing that has protected us for so long.
Yeah. It's some out of an apocalypse movie, it is frightening for sure. I would say the other thing that we didn't talk about is cyber attacks. To me, the EMP is obviously a very specific issue that, attacks everything electronic, but, the cyber attack on a large enough scale essentially gives you the same problem. Now granted, ECUs in vehicles and things like that will still work, but, if commerce is shut down, again, you essentially have about the same problem, so.
Yeah, those are definitely immediate threats. So EMP, cyber, and nukes used in creative ways, without a doubt, they're real. And what scares me is what do we not know?
Yeah.
What is the unknown that we as either a government or our intel agencies have no clue that what China actually has or what Russia actually has, right? I mean, that's even scarier. Yeah, big threats. Worth mentioning because it leads to the why. Why do you want to be prepared? I think we're realists. We're not preppers. We're survivalists in any sense, right? We're just, hey, it's probably better to have it than not, just in case a good day goes bad, right? Bug out. I mean, what else do you have that's kind of bug out related?
Well, so I kind of view it like security in a normal physical security environment is almost like an onion, or cold weather is, layers. And I think, kind of on the macro, the big picture, it's like, okay, if shit does go south and it turns into an apocalypse scenario for the long haul, what does that look like? And so having a property or an area, a living space identified that I can go to. So that's kind of on the macro. The micro is how do I get there and how long is it going to take, and what do I need to do to facilitate that? And that's where, to me, the bug out really comes into play, because the reality of it is if it's a long-term scenario, bugging out is only going to buy you some time. There has to be kind of an end goal. And again, even if you don't have the means to have a dedicated property, that's okay. At least know where you're going to go. I mean, it could be something as simple as BLM land or national forest areas. I mean, have something identified. Be creative. Resourcefulness is a skill. To look at going back to, say, spending time in the Philippines with some of the Filipino SEALs. Remember how resourceful those guys were, making fins out of plastic targets and using bamboo to make everything, and those guys were so good at taking things that you'd never think you could make something out of and made out of it, so identifying things that you can kind of use to your advantage, that even if you don't own them, again, just that planning in place. But to me, that's the big component that I think a lot of people skip. It's fun exciting, easy to have a bug out bag, to have even a bike or a vehicle all decked out and whatever. But again, think weeks, months, years. That's where I think a lot of people are woefully under-prepared. All the hydrated meals and, cool adventure bikes and like that, that's not going to last that long if you don't have kind of that long-term, long game mindset in place. So that's step one. Step two is, again, how do you get there? How do I buy myself some time from a communication standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from a food, water, shelter standpoint, and then kind of working backwards from there. Is that okay if you hit that reset button, depending on where I'm at, how long is it going to take me to gather what I need to get from where I'm at to that kind of final end point, and what do I need to accomplish that? So that's kind of how I look at it.
No, I think that's a great way to look at it. You got a layered approach, and I think you brought up the most valuable point is time. You rather have time as an ally than an adversary. And so when there's an initial crisis, you want as much time as you can on your side, which is why bug out is there. It's really, once again, going back to the beginning, organized, prepared life support systems that are in place to then give you some time. And then sustainability, really, the other piece of what you're talking about, like having those routes already planned, having that place that you're going to go to. There's a saying in, the clandestine covert world, whenever you're looking for a good safe site, and that is go big and go remote, right? So you want some place that has lots of space, it's big, and you want it as far away from everyone else as possible, right? So it decreases the odds of that clandestine force when I house them for a night, from being detected by third parties. And you almost have to treat everything you do as like a clandestine operation when it comes to this preparedness piece, because you don't want your neighbors, you don't want any third parties, no one, knowing where you're going, what you're doing, and how you're going to survive, because they'll take it from you in a heartbeat. And I joke about it. I don't know if I'd really actually do it. When we talk about resourcefulness, right? My neighbors are probably the first doors I'm going to kick in and take their stuff. If you're really going to be aggressive and truly plan on surviving. And doing that along the way, because there's no laws, no rules. And if you don't get on top of it, I feel like it'll just happen to you.
For sure. I mean, have you seen the show The Last of Us?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like the Nick Offerman character, the character that he plays in that, I think is as good of an example of kind of what we're talking about. Like you look at the biggest threats, and ultimately, what gives them the biggest problems are people trying to raid their, and the psychological component. Everybody is civil and has manners when there are resources for everybody. That goes right out the window. And again, COVID being a classic example, people fighting over toilet paper, like the panic mentality that existed for no reason, and it wasn't even that there was a huge shortage of toilet paper. It was that people thought there was going to be, and started buying it up. And it was, people are buying hand sanitizer and baby wipes and hawking them for higher price. I mean, it was crazy.
Ridiculous.
But that psychological component, I think, is something that, to pinpoint things that people don't take into account as much as they should. That's a huge one, because, when you get into that rat race, your life is on the line. Like, people do some pretty gnarly to each other. And I agree, like defensiveness and keeping your cards close, having an area that not everybody knows about and it isn't a flashing light or a beacon of alarm for people to understand that something's going on there is critical, because people are absolutely going to take your from you or try. So.
Yeah, no doubt. If you're not thinking ahead, making those decisions right now while it's calm, right? We know what happens when you make decisions under stress. It's a 50-50 chance. Right now, while it's calm, you can take an opportunity and go, okay, let's sit down as a family and let's get the basics figured out. What gear do we need? Do we all know how to use the gear? Talk about environmentals, the weather. Okay, got all that covered. Now we can roll into another layer, which would be medical, food, shelter, and all the good stuff, and the routes associated. So there's a planning process here, but like I said, I think if you just do the basics, you're 90+% ahead of everyone else that are just doing nothing.
For sure. I mean, to that point, when emotion runs high, logic and reason run very low.
Yeah.
You
no
know,
doubt.
yeah, I mean, that's when people make the dumbest decisions, is when they're emotional or panicking or, kind of under the gun
Yeah.
and under pressure. So yeah, I agree.
I think the big takeaway we've both kind of delineated here is the crisis itself becomes the indirect threat. It's what spurs everything, right? It's the cause, but the real effect is all human.
Yeah.
The real effect on me and you at a granular level is going to be other humans when things go south.
For sure.
Whether they're buying everything up or whether they're taking it, stealing it, murdering you. You got to have those basics in place just so that, once again, you buy back some time, initiate the rest of your plan, and hopefully disappear with as little third-party awareness as possible. So with that, motorcycles.
Motorcycle.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to have a bug-out RV, a bug-out vehicle, like a truck or something, a lot of people have, bug-out bags, bug-out weapons.
Yeah.
There's bug-out for everything, right? So bug-out motorcycles, both of us really enjoying motorcycles to begin with, but when you add adventure, and it's all wrapped up in this apocalyptic scenario, it's actually kind of fun, but it also is a little bit of worst case scenario. Like, let's say you're someone that you can only afford a $700 dirt bike,
Yeah.
right? And that dirt bike has the ability to go on roads, but the bigger beauty of it is it can go off-road.
Yeah.
You can throw soft bags. You can throw even the most basic backpacks and bungee cords and load out a very cheap vehicle with pretty much everything that you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
It carry yourself, maybe one other person, and all the gear. Worst case scenario.
Yeah.
You can't afford the big, cool, a Tacoma
Earth
that's loaded, or a Range Rover, or whatever whatever makes you happy. But for you, as we get into this adventure motorcycle world, what have been your big takeaways, I guess, and thoughts on it?
So again, for me, the two main components I think of, again, with the backdrop of, that apocalypse scenario reset button being hit, I'm trying to get from wherever I'm at to where I want to go. The two biggest things I'm looking at is range and load-bearing capability. In your scenario of all we can afford is a $700 dirt bike, hey, if that's what you can do, that's what you can do. There's still ways to increase that, a fuel bladder, some creative framing mechanisms to add storage, et cetera. But to me, that's what attracts me to the adventure bikes. I have the Ducati Multistrada Rally, it's called, which is kind of set up for the most extreme off-road from the Ducati lineup of their adventure bikes, because they have a few different ones. But it's got a 7.5 gallon tank. Those 3 boxes on it can hold a ton of shit. You can carry several hundred extra pounds of gear, which, we'll go through how I have that set up. But, to me, to be able to carry as much as I can with me from where I'm at, to sustain me to get from point A to point B, with a big enough gas tank to get me there where I'm not having to stop and deal with refueling constantly, were the two biggest things. All of the other kind of tech gadgets and niceties to it, from kind of a riding experience and performance capability standpoint, are really icing on the cake. They're obviously not necessary, but they are nice. If you're trying to get off-road and going through trails and areas that are a little more challenging to ride through, it's got a lot of rider aids to help you be a more efficient and effective rider, which for me is good. I didn't grow up riding. I've really just started riding in the last 4 or 5 years. So, for me, it's kind of nice to have a little help when it comes to the performance and competency and riding standpoint. But again, just to kind of reiterate, range and load-bearing capability are really the two big things that I'm looking at for the big picture.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And it's a beautiful bike. Look at these things. I've got the Harley Pan American. It's got roughly the same fuel capacity. It's got the same trunks and its capacity, somewhat the same, but definitely not a Ducati. It's a Harley. So even though it's the fastest Harley ever made,
Which is surprising.
it is really slow.
Yeah.
But when you talk about load bearing, how it's geared, the performance really is once you get off road with these things, and that suspension becomes invaluable.
Yeah.
and how it manages the load, but yet still provides that dirt bike quality so that you can negotiate different obstacles somewhat easily, right? And it's all about obviously rider skill set and working the throttle and the clutch and making sure you're on it and upright. You know, most people don't know for adventure riding, you're usually standing.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're gonna go through and break down what we should wear, you know, when you talk about exposure and all the different climate elements that you could potentially face on a bike. Then breaking down the bike itself, you know, we got racks and trunks and, you know, of course, the capability of the bike itself. And then the gear, right, which is the best part. You know, what are you gonna carry? How do you think through it in a minimalist aspect? And that's the other piece I really love about thinking about a bug out bike. It's forcing you to think, all right, what is it that I absolutely need versus what I absolutely want? And being a minimalist when it comes to this stuff and finding the smallest of each. I love finding like the mini this and the mini gadget and the, you know, and putting as much stuff into these bikes as possible, but giving you the greatest capability of survivability for as long as possible. Now, thoughts about transport. Obviously, a motorcycle, I think we both know, isn't going to be your primary getaway bike, right? But like I was saying, it's like, man, if you had like the RV or the van that's converted with a trailer with one of these, I think you're like set for like long-term apocalyptic crazy scenarios.
Yeah, you know, to me the storage capability thing, again, you know, once you get to your final destination, having a bike that can go just about anywhere, and let's say your storage containers are empty, you know, you can make runs and hunt and bring a lot of meat back. You know, go on supply runs if you're, you know, bartering with people, you know, getting other supplies. Like, it gives you a capability that, you know, even a off-road truck, a Raptor or a, you know, something like that is still going to have some limitations that these aren't going to have as far as, you know, running and you know, that kind of utility component. One thing I'll also bring up that's an important thing to think about is tires. You know, understand that if the goes down, you know, you always want to have good tires and ones that are going to be appropriate from getting from point A to point B. Now, if your planned route and even an alternative secondary or tertiary route affords you the ability to have more street-like tires, great. If it doesn't, I would actually have a spare set of knobby dirt bike style tires on the rims already set aside that you can use if you need, because, you know, rest assured, like, if you don't have the equipment to put those tires on it, you're luck. So that's a big thing to think about that I think a lot of people may overlook. So just wanted to throw that out there.
No, that's a good point. Tires become everything. It's like your shoes. I mean, they got to be ready to endure whatever it faces. And once you load these things out, the tires become exponentially more important, or else you're going to get stuck.
Yeah.
Last thing you can do is get your bike stuck.
Yeah.
But I do like the fact that you brought it up is stay off paved roads if things go bad.
Yeah.
And having the capability to take the routes that no one else can take, I mean, that's security in itself, right? I mean, once again, staying away from third parties, being able to negotiate obstacles that other vehicles won't is going to add layers and layers to your security posture in like a crazy situation.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, man. We talked about global stuff. We've talked about the threats or the why you need to be a little more prepared. And the big thing too is also resourcing a lot of this stuff. It's important, but you can do it at different scales of the financial spectrum, and create yourself a bug out plan with bug out gear and bug out vehicles. And with that, let's go ahead and dive in to bug out bikes.
Amen.